the naked young man is in a part of ancient mythologies, and Mark is not against using these Homeric tropes in order to make his gospel work for him, for his readers.
Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert, and I'm joined by the legend Dionysus himself, Dennis R. MacDonald. Welcome back.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. So I want to dive a little bit into this young naked man running from the garden scenario in Mark. And there is a good friend of mine, Stephen Nelson, who has been paying attention to all sorts of stuff that goes on online. There's a well-known, right now he's a classicist philologist who has made a very strange interpretation of this passage. Most of the people I know that engage the Greek, who actually look at the Greek, who are experts like yourself, who literally have translated the entire Homeric epics, the Gospels. I mean, like, you've literally, you know your thing about Greek. You went to Harvard about this stuff. Like, you've spent, how long have you known Greek here? Like,
well, I probably began studying at 19, 20.
And so how long is that? Like,
well, 60 years ago.
Okay, so you know a thing or two about Greek. You've looked into these claims. Amon Hillman is the guy. David Hillman is his technical legal name, I believe, something like that. And he's pushed this view called the satanic interpretation, or the satanic version of Mark's passage here. I'm not going to be able to, for sake of YouTube and monetization and things like that, go into the elaboration of what he's saying, but ultimately his interpretation of the young man as a young boy. He believes that there's some extraction of fluids in order to cure overdoses that have to do with drug addiction and trafficking of children, all this crazy stuff in a garden in this text. And when I ask other people, anyone else who knows any Greek, they're like, it's all figment of his imagination, and his imagination is perverted. And so he's stuck going, well, no, it's not my imagination. I could show you other ancient examples from the Greek world where there are things like this. And I think most of the people I've talked to say, yeah, there are. There are examples of this stuff out there, but it's not in this text that you're talking about. So I wanted to talk about what is going on in Mark 14 with the young man fleeing. What have you discovered based on your research, the Greek you know? How do you understand this? Stephen Nelson, with his very sharp and good Greek, recognizing that that's not what's going on in this passage as well. Take it from here.
Mark is responsible for this naked young man at the garden. He's also responsible for the clothed young man at Jesus' tomb at the end. In both cases, the fellow is called a neaniskos. A neaniskos is not a child. A neaniskos is a warrior fit young man. The word for the garment that he's abandoning, and he's nude after that, is a sindon. The shroud that Joseph of Arimathea wraps Jesus' nude body in is a sindon. The young man at the tomb no longer is wearing a sindon, and he's no longer naked. He's parablamenos. He has a new garment put on. It's a white robe to symbolize resurrection. And these two characters are echoing each other. They're doing so because they are both anonymous. They are both neaniskoi. They are both issues of dress. In the one case, he's an anti-hero. Jesus is going to be crucified nude and then have a sindon. This young man is playing like a male baptismal candidate. He's naked until he puts on his post-baptismal robe and he gives witness to the resurrection. Now, Hillman says nothing about the young man at the end of Mark. Nothing. And
in Mark 16.
Mark 16. So he's only interested in what he considers to be this boy toy in the garden, and flees naked and so on. That is an abomination itself. And Stephen Nelson has gone through the philology of all this stuff, and he and I are on the same page exactly. It's just nonsense.
So apart from the morally abhorrent, right?
Because I want to avoid that.
Yeah, clearly. And I look, I mean, I don't even want to make that case, because a lot of people who watch, right, they made a criticism of the last interview I did with Richard Carrier, because Richard didn't get into the Greek. And they go, if you're not dealing with Greek on the spot, you don't know what you're talking about. I want to deal with the Greek. I want to see someone who knows the Greek. Amen knows the Greek. And it's so funny. Amen will pull up the Greek in front of them, like in his streams, and doesn't show them the English. He tells them what it says. Like a good cult leader tells you the meaning of things without actually spelling it out and showing you and giving you the exact meaning of a lot of things. He kind of leaves you in the dark and says, oh, trust me, bro, I've got all this experience. Well, trust me, bro, you've got over 60 years of experience, and I think we should listen to what you have to say here. Now, the other problem is they don't really care about the moral in the sense that they don't mind talking about it. They're not grossed out discussing it. They do think it's gross, most of them, if I'm going to still man it, now that I've heard some criticisms, is that they're not for it. They're saying they're not for it. I know there's mixed signals we can get out of Amen, but the point is this. Is there drugs going on? You said it's not a young boy in this passage in Mark 14. And if not, what's the best way, without cutting through the fluff of all the different interpretations, what's the best way to understand what this Markan passage is doing in Mark 14 to Mark 16? So if you can, drugs, and then what is Mark up to?
There's nothing about drugs in these scenes. As far as I can tell, there's nothing about drugs. Now, we do have a Homeric pattern for this, and it's brilliant, and it was exploited by Virgil in the Aeneid as well. There's a young man named Elpenor, who was one of Odysseus's crew. He's not called a neaniskos, he's called the equivalent in Homeric Greek, a neanios. It's the same root. It's the same, he's a young man. Mm-hmm. He gets drunk at Circe's palace before Odysseus and his men have to go to Hades. He falls, Odysseus calls his men at dawn and says, we need to be going to Hades. And Elpenor forgets that he's been sleeping on Circe's roof to work off his drunk. And he falls and breaks his neck, and his soul
runs away,
flees to Hades.
Gotcha.
And his body is left at Circe's house. So his soul is denuded from his body. And ancient artists, when they depicted Elpenor, it depicted him nude.
Gotcha.
Okay, so what happens? Odysseus goes to the netherworld and he encounters Elpenor. And Elpenor says, I can't get into Hades for eternal rest unless my body gets buried. And Odysseus says, okay, I'll go back to Circe's island and I'll bury your body. So after being in Hades, visiting Tiresias and Heracles and so on, Agamemnon and whomever, Achilles, he goes back to Circe's, and at dawn,
same time that this naked young man is fleeing, or no, the resurrection scene in Mark 16's at dawn.
He's there, and what happens? Okay, in book 12 of the Odyssey, at dawn, they gather Elpenor's body.
Right.
They then cut down trees and build a pyre, and he then dies and is buried among great weeping, because he was the youngest of all of their of the troops. You know, he survives the Trojan War. He survives Polyphemus and Circe and so on, and now he dies because he was drunk and died. Virgil uses that character twice One for one of his comrades, Maecenas, and another is quite clearly Palinurus, and Palinurus falls into the water and dies, and his soul, his body never gets buried because the people in Italy burn his body or something. I forget exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Elpenor was a very important character. He also appears in Plato for his myth of the is a soldier who dies and goes to Hades and comes back and tells people about what he saw in Hades. This is a trope.
Yeah.
It's something that people saw in the Odyssey and they loved. Plato had his imitation of it. Virgil has his imitation of it. Mark has his imitation of it. Hillman says nothing about the Homeric background.
And that's the master of Greek. You want to be a Greek pro, Greek master? Why are you leaving out the man himself, the Greek man himself, Homer? I mean, let's be honest.
Well, and Neaniskos is not a victim, a child victim of sex.
Yeah.
He's a soldier.
Right.
He's not a brave soldier, and he's not very smart.
Are you talking about Elpenor?
Elpenor.
Yeah.
But he still is a warrior.
Yeah.
And so is the neaniskos who runs away is a virile man like you, capable of warfare and so on. And that's what's going on. And it's quite clear that is the background to it. And here, Hillman doesn't give a nod at all to the story of Elpenor.
That's unfortunate because you see the theme of about to approach the underworld, okay, in whatever means, right? One is going to face death and enter the underworld, Jesus, but the initiate, the follower of Christ that's with him in the garden, unnamed, anonymous, you, the reader, are fleeing in a sense like the Elpenor. And so if I'm reading this story, help me contextualize Mark, right? Now that we have that background, what does Mark mean? Here, they're in the garden, the disciples fall asleep, right? They can't even stay up. I believe this is in Mark as well, right? And then the soldiers come in with swords, like he's a bandit, like this guy might be militant, hinting at this stuff that we've been kind of queuing in on as well with like Josephus and stuff. There is this notion that these guys might be violent, but he's like, why are you coming with swords? I'm not violent. Like, hey, I'll go with you. What's up? The guy flees. They grab his tunic, whatever, he runs and flees, right? Why is he fleeing in the symbolism of Mark in your view?
He's an anti-hero the same way that Elpenor was an anti-hero to Odysseus. But I want to go back to the baptismal business.
Okay.
Early Christians are more likely to see in the Elpenor character a male initiate, a baptismal initiate, than they are to be Elpenor. So what happens? A male baptismal initiate wears a shabby garment or some garment and is baptized nude. And in so doing, as you have it already in Paul, you take off certain things in baptism and you put on a new garment because you have died and risen with Jesus. Jesus dies, and the young man is the one who gives the statement that Jesus has risen, and you get the notion that the young man too is now clothed in a inner robe, a white robe, and he's the baptismal initiate that's giving this word to the women that he's out of the tomb.
Gotcha.
Now, why did Mark do that? Mark doesn't want Jesus's followers to see him after the resurrection. And that's a different story.
Of course.
I can give a background to that. But Hillman is tone deaf to Christian baptismal imagery, and he's really tone deaf to the Homeric imitation of Elpenor. And I go back, Plato's famous myth of and twice in the Aeneid, And once in Lucian, and then once in Apuleius, we have imitations of this character.
Right.
So I don't know if he was intentionally avoiding those parallels, but the parallels are there.
Just to add icing on the cake, feel free to topple it with a cherry. The very next scene after he's arrested, Jesus is arrested, you would think someone who's skilled in interpreting text in the Greek, all of that, would get to the next chapter, in chapter 15, and take the accusations from the Jews that are giving this kind of kangaroo trial on Jesus. You would think they'd mention that he's this thing that Ammon's saying he is. All of that's absent. Like, no, he's not accused of trafficking and doing all this stuff that Ammon's claiming that he's. So, like, common sense tells me, it's this charismatic cult mentality that I think he carries about himself that people are just duped by. And there's nothing I can do or you could do or say. But I would like anyone who thinks, his confidence is pretty wooey and he knows a lot of Greek to take consideration by someone like you who has 60 years engaging with the Greek. But I would also take it a step further and say that I have actually spoken to Carl Ruck myself. And I know people who've talked to Carl Ruck, which was his doctor fodder. And literally they're like, he's not buying this. So why are they buying it? Other than something isn't right. I don't know. Kind of weird. Anyway, Dennis, any final words? Cherry on top?
No, I'm so glad we had this conversation. I think this is a mysterious young man. I can understand why people like Morton Smith earlier had some similar thoughts about this naked young man. And the naked young man is in a part of ancient mythologies. And Mark is not against using these Homeric tropes in order to make his gospel work for him, for his readers.
Yeah, and I don't want to leave people with the impression that there weren't ancient concoctions of psychedelics or
there were.
There's tons of stuff like that. Yeah. The thing is just because you can't use a heuristic approach to just, we see it over here. This cult did it, and this is also a cult. Therefore, association fallacy, and make them also, they may be a purity cult, or this particular version in Mark might not be representing anything like that. So without having explicit data that gives you that and confirms it, don't assume. Don't jump to a conclusion. And you see what I'm trying to say.
The only liquid that's in the story is at the Last Supper and wine and so on. And yes, wine can be inebriated, especially for additional elements that are added to it, and it often was the case.
Yep.
But to do what Hillman has done is really inexcusable. Even as a classicist, I would have to say he's just inexcusable.
Yeah. Thank you.